Hello and welcome to the Crystal Palace podcast. I'm Alfonso Greenbrook, and in today's podcast I'll be looking over the game against Chelsea by bringing you my match review, player rankings and my man of the match. As well as this, I'm also going to bring you interviews with Roy Hodgson and Luka Milivojevic after the game. So let's begin. Palace ended 2018 with a defeat at the hands of Chelsea, as N'Golo Kante's 50-minute strike proved to be enough for the Blues to win in this capital clash. The Frenchman tucked home just after half-time, which proved to be the game's key moment, but Chelsea enjoyed the better of the chances throughout the 90 minutes, which saw them hit the goal frame twice and Olivier Giroud find the net twice, only to be flagged offside. A late flurry by Palace saw a golden chance blazed over by Wickham, but ultimately they failed to end their 7-year wait to end a calendar year with a victory. Perhaps due to the fact that both teams were playing their third game in 8 days, the opening stages began at a glacial pace and produced nothing of note until Kante flushed a shot well wide after 17 minutes. 10 minutes after that, Giroud had the ball in the net when he latched onto a dink pass by Jorginho to blast an angled volley past Vicente Gaeta. But before he could celebrate scoring another wonderful goal at the Eagles' expense, it was rightly ruled for offside, albeit marginally. As the first 45 continued, the hosts continued to be content to soak up pressure, but that meant that their goal was the one under much more threat. And in the space of a few minutes, Jorginho fired into the Homesdale before Willian whipped a free kick against the post. Then after, the Brazilian tested Gaeta from range with a 30-yard grass cutter. The same piece of woodwork was rattled again when Ross Barkley acrobatically hit the ball against the post from the resulting corner. Hodgson's team would have been pleased to have kept the West Londoners at bay as they headed down the tunnel at half-time, but their resilience ended 5 minutes after the break when Chelsea found a way to edge in front. David Luiz chipped the pass into the box and Kante made a great run to squeeze behind the defensive line, and his low shot had just enough power to trickle over the line despite Gaeta getting a hand to it, and end a year that saw him lift the World Cup on another high. With the lead in their back pocket, Mucho Sarri's team continued to probe, and in 72 minutes Giroud once again produced a fine finish when he rifled the ball past Gaeta but was again thwarted by the linesman's flag, which looked to be a tad fortunate for the home side, and to add insult to injury, the striker was injured in the process and saw his afternoon end painfully and prematurely. Sights on goal were a rarity for Palace all afternoon, but in the dying stages two arrived but were squandered. Firstly, Wilfried Zaha received possession on the left and he took aim but drove over the bar, and then with 2 minutes remaining Luka Milivojevic pumped a long free kick into the box which was nodded down by James Tompkins to Wickham. But after doing well to bring the ball down, the striker hammered it and his team's chances of a point over the top. So I'm now going to move on to my player ratings, but before I start, don't forget you can follow us on both Twitter and Facebook at Crystal Palace for all the latest Palace news. So if you are someone like myself who likes to follow various accounts across social media, including both Facebook, and of course you are someone who wants to keep up to date with all the latest Palace news, then of course do give us a follow on both our Twitter and Facebook accounts at Crystal Palace. And one of the main reasons for that is because we have a vast array of different sort of news stories that we like to keep you guys up to date with. So whether that be transfer news, obviously, especially during the transfer window, obviously that's very relevant. Of course, player interviews as well, and just general sort of club news, and also our opinions after games. So if you are someone who's looking for another Palace account to follow, you know, for the latest news, especially transfer window, obviously, or especially during the transfer window with all the sort of transfer news, both ins and outs, which are going to be going about this year, as well as just general sort of news and interviews around the club. So if you are someone who wants another Palace account to follow on both Twitter and Facebook to obviously get all your latest news, then of course you can do so. And of course, you know, loads of accounts, including my own personal one. You know, I like to put out my opinion after games. So if you are someone who just wants another opinion of a game, then of course you can follow us as well to get our opinion on there. Now, another great place to share your opinion is in the YouTube comments. So if you are listening to the podcast on YouTube, then do feel free to drop a comment below the video with your player ratings where you rate the player's performance from 1 to 10. Now, obviously 10 would be the best in that aspect, and one of the main reasons I want you to rate the players out of 10 is basically so that I can compare how I rated the players to yours. So rather than me just having my general view of the game and my sort of ratings of how I how well I thought the players performed. If you guys just comment below with your player ratings, it basically means I can sort of compare how you thought the players performed and compare it to mine. And if there are some sort of differences, of course, I'm also always open to discussion as well. So if you are someone who wants to get involved, wants to share your opinion so I can see how you know, your aspect of the game, of course, feel free to do so. And even if you're not a Palace fan, maybe if you're a Chelsea fan, or even if you don't want to really comment, you know, your player ratings of the game, feel free just to comment below with your general views of the game. So whether that be from a Chelsea perspective, you know, how well you thought Chelsea played, or if you didn't think they played well, how well you think Palace defended. You know, we defended quite well, but once again our attack was quite lackluster. So if you've got anything different from player ratings that you want to you want to share and you want me to read, so obviously I can see what you guys think, and of course feel free to do that. And also if you do have any questions for me, you know, throughout the podcast, if anything does pop up, obviously you can either contact us on Twitter or of course, you know, comment below, because I'm obviously always open to having discussions with you lot. Now obviously, aside from me coming back to the video, any other Palace fans or Chelsea fans who come to the video, not only will they listen to my view in the podcast, but also they can read the comment section. So once again, it just gives the whole sort of fan base, whether Chelsea or Palace fans, just gives them sort of another area, I suppose, another platform for them just to share their opinion and obviously view other people's opinions. Now if you do want to follow any of the social media pages that I've mentioned or join the Facebook group, then do check all links that will be in the description below. But I'm now going to move on to the player ratings. I'm going to start in goal with Vicente Gaeta, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. Now obviously before the game there was obviously once again quite a lot of discussion as to who would start this game, mainly because Hennessy was back from his injury, so of course it was going to be, you know, one-on-one who was going to actually, you know, get the first team gloves. And I obviously said that I thought that Vicente Gaeta had done enough in the last 3 games to warrant his starting place, and that's exactly what he did. So he was obviously preferred to Wayne Hennessy, and I don't necessarily think it's because Hennessy's necessarily bad now. It's just the fact that Vicente Gaeta came into the side, done so well, so he really deserves to keep his place. So obviously, you know, you've got to give a bit of credit there, the fact that he's come into the side obviously in difficult games, you know, against Leicester, against Man City, and the fact that he still performed like he did here against Chelsea was of course great to see. So of course started and obviously was preferred to Wayne Hennessy, and for the majority of the game he looked very comfortable, and especially in that first half where we were under the cosh trying to absorb the pressure, I do think he looked very comfortable, mainly because he was making a number of good saves. Now like I said already, obviously there was quite a lot of debate beforehand, but I personally think Vicente Gaeta has now cemented his place as the first team goalkeeper, mainly because of how comfortable he looks and just because of the saves he makes as well. And it's not to say that Hennessy's necessarily done bad recently, it's just the fact that he got injured, someone stepped in and obviously took your place. You know, you have to look at Aaron Wan-Bissaka as an example. Joe Ward got injured, Fosu Mensah got injured, I believe Kelly, obviously Hodgson doesn't really play Kelly at right back, so we had no options at right back. Aaron Wan-Bissaka comes in there, performs so well, and now he's kept his place. So it just shows that actually, even if you may not necessarily be you know, first choice, if you actually, when you know, get the chance, if you take it, you obviously might actually get the chance to stay in the side, and certainly that's what Vicente Gaeta did. Now obviously his first half was really good, you know, I was really comfortable, and obviously he made a number of good saves, but of course the second half, you know, 5 minutes in we obviously conceded the first goal. Some probably will feel that he probably should have done better with Kante's goal, but for me personally I think there's more sort of blame to be put on the defence, mainly because Vicente Gaeta actually got a hand to the strike in the first place, so he actually got closer than any of our defenders actually did to actually stopping the goal. But of course, because obviously it was from such close range, you know, he couldn't quite get enough power on it to actually get the ball away. But nevertheless, the fact that he still attempted to get on the end of it, especially from that close range, and especially, you know, when a player's, you know, making that late run into the box, obviously that's quite a difficult situation for the keeper. So he done a relatively good job, but obviously it wasn't quite enough. But I do certainly think the defence was at fault for that, mainly because, you know, you got someone like Patrick Vanana who was obviously ball watching, and obviously wasn't able to get to Kante quick enough. Someone like Saka, who I thought was relatively good in the game, he obviously, you know, didn't mark Kante close enough. And, you know, if you look at our first half, we were so great defensively. In the second half, that little lapse of concentration, you know, let Kante come through. So for me personally, it's mainly on the defence, but I'm not really going to give, you know, I can't really blame Gaeta for that goal in particular. But, you know, some people will argue, and I've seen quite a lot of people saying that if Hennessy had made that mistake, if Hennessy had let the ball go in there, obviously people will be blaming him for it. But I personally think that neither Gaeta or Hennessy probably would have stopped that goal, mainly because of just because of how powerful the ball was, and also because of how close range it was, and also because of how easy the defenders let Kante through is obviously going to make life difficult for any goalkeeper. So for me personally, don't really think there's any fault on Gaeta for the goal we conceded. So if you actually put the goal aside, he actually had a very solid performance overall. So like I've said already, first half, a number of decent saves, and even though some of his distribution, even though it's been good in recent games, you know, not brilliant, but it's been good, there was a few wayward balls in this game here, but other than that, and you know, if you combine that with the fact that he made quite a lot of good saves throughout the game, I do think overall he had a fairly sort of so-and-so performance, you know, so-so. He'd done some good things, you know, maybe could have been better, you know, with other things, but I do think overall a very competent performance from him. And obviously he looks like now he's cemented that place, you know, as his own. He looks like he's getting more confidence the more games he plays, so hopefully for us he can continue to perform well. And actually with Hennessy coming back, that's going to do him the world, because the pressure's going to be on him now to keep that place. So hopefully he just keeps up his standards so that he can keep Hennessy out of the side, because that's what I want to see. You know, to see competition between places, and if competition between Hennessy and Gaeta is, you know, resulting in good performances from whoever the first choice is out of them two, then of course that's great to see. So I do think overall Vicente Gaeta a 6 is a fair result. So I'm going to move on now to the first player in our defence, and that is of course Aaron Wan-Bissaka, the right back, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. Now of course every week in week out, I always talk about how good Aaron Wan-Bissaka is, and this, once again, the fact that I've given him a 7, this performance was no different. You know, he was one of our standout performers again, and it doesn't really come as a surprise anymore, but you know, I might as well you know, talk about his performance and how good it was. Now of course he's done really well against, you know, a vast array of players this season, most notably, you know, Leroy Sané in the Man City game. He done superbly against him. So of course Leroy Sané is on a top level playing for Man City, but Eden Hazard is, you know, even above that. He is a world-class player. So the fact that Wan-Bissaka dealt with Eden Hazard so well, basically just leaving him lots of scrappy balls, basically just keeping him to scraps in the game, making sure that he didn't necessarily get on the ball as much as he would have liked, you know, was really great to see. So the fact that he dealt with him, or that considerable fair, it wasn't just the fact that he dealt with a player so well, the fact that a player of Eden Hazard's stature was the scraps in the game because of how well Wan-Bissaka done against him was of course great to see. Now obviously it didn't really matter for Chelsea, the fact that Hazard wasn't really involved as he would have liked to be. That's because obviously Kante, who's the most unlikely to score, has obviously got the goal. But nevertheless, you know, if you nullify, especially in that first half, if you nullify one of Chelsea's best attackers, then of course, you know, they're not going to have as many chances as they would have liked. And certainly their dominance probably deserved a few more chances, but like I've said, the fact that we dealt with Eden Hazard so well was of course great to see. Now just to go back, you know, what I say week in, week out, but in this game here, no different in the fact that he made, you know, a number of good tackles throughout the game. And even though he's the youngest player on the field, the fact that he showed maturity in his play, you know, the fact that he was making sure he was timing these tackles at the right time, making sure he was positionally in the right position as well, and the fact that just, aside from just being in the right position, the fact that he had that positional sense throughout the game, so the fact that he was able to know when to go forward and support the attack, the fact that he knew how to get the balance between doing that and doing his defensive work, so the fact that he was obviously in the right place positionally, but also had that sense to actually, whatever was happening in the game, the moments in the game, the fact that he was able to adapt his play to go further up or further back along the pitch, that was of course great to see. And you know, one of the things I've really been sort of praising him about recently is just his attacking play. So the fact that he was actually going up whenever possible to actually support the attack whilst also getting back into position to do his defensive work was of course great to see. And you know, even though he wasn't necessarily getting as many balls in the box as he had done in recent games, the fact that he was actually proving that threat on the overlap on that right hand side was of course great to see. And you know, there were a number of chances where actually you could have said he was playing as a right winger because of how far he was up the pitch. But even though he was playing that far up the pitch, you know, we've seen with some fullbacks sometimes that can leave them exposed, but even though he was playing so far up the pitch, trying to push Chelsea whenever we could on the counter-attack, yes, we didn't have many chances, but when we could go on the counter-attack, the fact that he was so far up the pitch, it really was a credit to him, the fact that he was able to get back and defend so well as he did. So the fact that he got that balance right was of course great to see. Now, like I've said already, yes, his forward play was good, but it probably lacked a bit of the effectiveness that his defensive work does. So we know how good he is defensively, and even though he was looking to get forward, it wasn't as effective as his defending is. But of course that's something he can develop going forward. But obviously, ultimately, as a fullback, your number one priority is going to be defending. So the fact that he's now building upon his fantastic defending and tackling ability and starting to go forward and starting to be an outlet for us, because he's obviously looking a threat going forward, is of course great to see. But like I've said already, it's not really his fault that his forward play lacked efficiency, obviously because it's not he as a player isn't really developed in that area yet, but also the fact that we were just under the cosh for the majority of the game meant that he didn't necessarily get forward as he would have liked. But overall, I do think for the most part, on the most time in the pitch, he had the ball upfield. He was always looking to carry the team forward, and even though we were playing quite a negative style in the fact that we were sitting deep, not really attacking Chelsea, even though that was the case, the few chances we did go forward, quite a lot of it was coming down the flank. So the fact that Wan-Bissaka, Van Aanholt, and even someone like Townsend as well, the fact that they were actually looking to actually get the ball field was of course great to see. But much as what has been the theme of our season this, well, I suppose the last few games in particular, against Cardiff, against Chelsea, these are two teams who've defended relatively well, albeit they're two different teams, one near the bottom of the league and one at the top, but nevertheless, both teams defended well, and one of the reasons we didn't necessarily have that many options, or we didn't necessarily have that good play upfield, it's mainly because we didn't really have any options. We had little options because of how well the opposition were defending. But overall, Aaron Wan-Bissaka, another fantastic performance from him, and certainly does deserve the 7. One of our standout performers on the day, mainly because of how well he dealt with Eden Hazard. But the fact that he done what he normally does, making loads of tackles, showing maturity, having that positional sense, as well as combining that with his offensive play going forward, that was of course great to see. So I do think a 7 overall is a fair result for the youngster. So now I'm going to move on to the first of our two centre-backs, and that is of course James Tomkins, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. Now, much like what I said with Wan-Bissaka, and in fact that one of the reasons he had such a good performance, hence why I've given both these players a 7, is just because of how well they dealt with, players in particular. So obviously in Wan-Bissaka's case, it was the fact that he dealt with Eden Hazard so well, and of course James Tomkins, because he was playing as a centre-back, more centrally, it meant that he had to obviously keep Olivier Giroud quiet for the majority of the game. Now, when you consider how, the fantastic goals Giroud normally scores against us, the fact that we kept him quiet, and actually the fact that we defended so well against him, the fact that we restricted him to so little chances was of course great to see. So much like Wan-Bissaka done really, really well against Eden Hazard, James Tomkins in particular done really well at actually just keeping Olivier Giroud quiet for the game, and essentially just making it life difficult for him by obviously restricting his chances. Now, even though Giroud did get 2 goals, obviously disallowed for offside, I think the second one was maybe a bit tight, but certainly the first one was offside. That was obviously a bit nervy in the fact that we did let him go through and score, but he normally scores good goals against us, but on this occasion we defended well for the most part, other than them 2 shots he managed to get in. So that was of course great to see. And when you consider James Tomkins, he went about his job, he done it quite efficiently, was of course great to see. And I think the phrase I like to use is just quietly efficient. So the fact that he just went about his job, not necessarily making a big deal about it, but just doing what he has to do defensively, making it hard for the opposition was of course great to see. Now, when you look at our first half in particular, where we were absolutely fantastic defensively, obviously Tomkins was one of the main architects for that. And I suppose one of the reasons why Chelsea couldn't get past us is because they were trying to play sort of fluid, attacking football, but then they've got a target man in Olivier Giroud up top. So maybe we dealt with Giroud so well, maybe that's one of the reasons why Chelsea didn't necessarily have many chances in the first half. But I personally think it's just the way that Chelsea set up. They've got a big target man, but rather than getting the ball to his head and actually using that ability, they've sort of tried to play the ball out wide. So obviously, maybe in that respect is why Chelsea didn't necessarily do as well in the first half as they did in the second half. But I personally do think it's mainly because of how well we defended against, the attacking players, especially Hazard and Giroud in particular. Now, one of the things I liked about Tomkins' performances, and aside from his man marking of Giroud, one of the reasons I've given him a 7 is just because he barely misplaced a pass in this game, which of course is something we've come to expect from him. But a team like Chelsea of their calibre, with their passing ability, and obviously the fact that they had the majority of the possession, obviously you don't really want to be giving the ball away. So the fact that he didn't misplace a pass, or hardly misplaced a pass in the game, was of course great to see. And the fact that he also proved the threat from set pieces as well, which is something we've seen from him in previous seasons. But of course it was nice to see him actually going up for a number of set pieces, and especially towards the end of the game, he was obviously always getting on the end of them, heading rather than actually having a chance himself. And he's actually trying to be the playmaker, so he's actually trying to get the ball to someone else. And that chance in particular for Wickham at the end of the game, yes, Wickham fired it over, but the fact that Tomkins got that flick to get the ball to Wickham in the first place shows obviously how effective we are. Well, not necessarily effective from set pieces, but shows we've actually got players who, that if we actually put in a good delivery, they can pose a threat. So of course it was great to see Tomkins doing great defensive work, but also proving a threat with his, threat with his flick-ons and stuff from set pieces. And certainly our set pieces at the weekend, they weren't great. or they weren't great, you know, against Chelsea the other day. But I do necessarily think that actually there were a few occasions that even though our deliveries weren't great, the fact that players still able to make something from it was of course great to see. And certainly Tompkins, you know, we've known him previously for actually scoring from set pieces, but this season he hasn't necessarily done that, and quite a few of them have gone high and wide. So the fact that now he's actually looking to be provider rather than actually trying to take that risk and that ball going out for a goal kick, the fact that he's looking for his teammates was of course great to see. And you know, even though he didn't necessarily have much in the way of service in terms of, you know, the set pieces in particular, it's the fact that he still went about his job was a really credit to him, and certainly one of the reasons I've given him a 7. Now, the only real negative about his performance, and certainly if we'd gone on to even if we you know lost the game we lost the game 1-0, but let's say we got back into it 1-1, or even if we lost it 2, maybe even 3-0 or 3-1, whatever the scoreline you want to imagine, I do think that Tompkins nevertheless probably would have got an 8 for his performance because he was so good defensively. But the only real negative I really felt from his performance is just the fact that in the first half he allowed Rudiger a very free header, and that could have been costly. So that was just one example where, you know, maybe he would, I suppose, a lapse of concentration where he's let Rudiger get a free header inside the box, and of course nothing came from it, but that's just something which you could say could have been costly. But like I said, that was really the sum of his errors. That was literally the only error he made in the game. So like I've said already, whatever the scoreline would have been, you know, let's just imagine, let's say it was 2, maybe even 3-0 or 3-1, whatever the scoreline may have been, providing that he didn't make a massive error for the goals that we could have conceded, then maybe you'd look at it and go, actually Tompkins probably could have got that 8. But I do certainly think the fact that he made that little error, I do think overall that means that he does deserve the 7. But once again, the fact that he dealt with Giroud so well throughout the game, and the fact that he kept him quiet, limited his chances, the fact that he obviously just went about and done his defensive work quite efficiently, as well as not really misplacing a pass, and obviously proving to be a threat from set pieces, that was of course great to see. So I do think James Tompkins here, another solid performance from him, and certainly does deserve the 7 I've given him. So I'm going to move on now to our second centre-back, and that is of course Mamadou Sakho, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. Now once again, obviously in talking about players they had to deal with, you know, man marking, obviously I talked about Tompkins dealing with Olivier Giroud, and even though that was primarily Tompkins' job, I do think there were periods of the game where Sakho obviously had to deal with him, and you know, against his country teammate, he actually done a relatively good job up against him, and one of the main reasons for that is because he made a couple of important challenges, obviously especially against Giroud as well, but other times when Chelsea are getting the ball in the box, the fact that he just got in the way himself, you know, in the way of the danger was of course great to see. Now, obviously, you know, Sakho's someone who comes up for quite a lot of debate. Some people think, like in this game in particular, I thought he played really, really well, and certainly if we'd got a clean sheet, he would have deserved it. But some people are saying because he's a bit clumsy sometimes, because he makes silly mistakes, or sometimes he makes people a bit nervous on the ball, doesn't really make him a good defender. But actually, if you just look at it, aside from these little things he does, he's actually a really solid defender, and this game showed here the fact that he just makes these important challenges sometimes go unnoticed to people because they really want to pick out when he loses the ball on the edge of the area, or when he makes them, you know, quite nervous. But actually, you know, you've got to put that aside and just look at the performance itself, and I do think he performed really, really well. And I do think some people who really think that Sakho isn't that good, they really need to look at his performances, because he is really crucial to how we set up defensively. And this game was a classic example with the fact that he was really, really good up against Olivier Giroud, and the fact that he made lots of important challenges throughout the game. Now, I suppose one of the reasons why he had such a good thing is just that why he had such a good performance is mainly just because of his sort of style of defending. So the fact that he was just being that authority at the back, making sure that he was commanding the back, making sure he was just being that presence at the back to stop Chelsea. And that was one of the reasons why I thought he sort of tempered a good display. It's just because of how he approached the game. The fact that he had sort of a real sort of authoritarian sort of defending style, the fact that he was just being that sort of commanding, I suppose, with his defending, that was of course great to see. And you know, yes, there were a few wayward passes, which of course is why some people criticise him. Aside from that, and the fact that obviously they put us under pressure, but aside from that, like I've said already, I think he put in a really, really good display. He just made his presence known and had that authority at the back to actually defend as well as he did. And you know, Chelsea are no easy opposition. You know, they've been scoring lots of goals this season, and Hazard in particular has got loads of goals and assists. So the fact that we managed to nullify him in the game, and other than the goal we conceded, which was obviously a bit of sloppy defending, obviously from Sakho and Van Aanholt, aside from that, he actually done really, really well in the game. And you know, like I said already, even though he puts us under pressure sometimes with some of his passing, you know, especially his wayward passing, put that aside, he's actually a really, really solid, competent defender, and certainly one of our most consistent performers in the side. Because some people don't see it, they just look at his mistakes, but actually if you look at his actual performances and just his defensive work and just his work rate, I suppose, in that aspect. And obviously the important challenges as well, you'll obviously see quite clearly how important he is to the side. And even though, like I've said, he may not always look the greatest, and some may say that, actually, he's a really important sort of mainstay to our side. But like I've said already, the fact that he done really well against Giroud, even though he was less effective as Tompkins, but he was still relatively effective. So yes, Tompkins was better in the fact that I've given him a 7, and it was just a few of these wayward passes which really limits me to 6, giving Saka a 6. So I do think overall he was just he was every bit as effective as Tompkins, other than the fact that he made a few wayward passes, and like I said already, done reasonably well up against Olivier Giroud, and the fact that he made a couple of important challenges in a game against this with the quality that Chelsea have was of course great to see. So Mamadou Saka here, I'm going to give him a 6 overall. So I'm going to move on now to the last player in our back four, and that is of course the left back Patrick Vanano, who I'm going to give a 5 overall. Now, much like what I said with a few players in the defence and so far, in the fact that they had certain players in particular to mark up against, obviously Vanano had a little bit more of a difficult task in the fact that he was up against two players, Willian and Kante up against him, and that was just mainly because the way Chelsea play at the minute, obviously, their midfielders are quite fluid in the fact that they obviously change positions. So obviously meant that Kante normally plays down the middle, but he was drifting out wide and obviously playing sort of alongside Willian, and obviously the fact that Kante got really sort of epitomises that sort of formation and the way they sort of set up, in the fact that he's not normally meant to be in that sort of area. He's obviously their defensive midfielder, but obviously this sort of fluid system they're playing allowed him to get into that position to score. But like I've said already, Vanano had it quite difficult in comparison to his defensive partners, in the fact that he had two players who, one of them has just got lots and lots of power, lots of sort of tenacity in Kante, and then someone with the skill and pace of Willian. So the fact that he's up against these two obviously was going to be quite difficult, and he was always going to have a difficult time because obviously Chelsea, quality opposition, and when you've got two players of good calibre up against you, it's obviously going to be difficult. And I do think quite a lot of the time he dealt with the diagonal ball well, but he was just a bit too open at the back. So even though he done relatively well up against these two players in particular, in the fact that he was able to stop them actually getting balls into the box and actually stopping these diagonal balls as well, that was obviously great to see down Chelsea's right hand side. But the fact that sometimes when he was going forward, he was leaving it a bit open at the back, he's got to take a bit of blame for that, because you look back at the goal we scored and it was him and Saka who were actually the last mans who were closest to Kante when he scored. So you've got to look at that and go, yes, he was fairly competent in the fact that he was able to stop Chelsea actually creating chances by actually stopping the diagonal balls in particular, but the negative side of that is the fact that he obviously left it a bit open at the back, and in particular for the goal, he obviously allowed Kante quite freely to get into the box. Now, one of the other negatives, and this is one of the reasons why, that even though he was fairly good defensively, in the fact that in that first half in particular he stopped the balls getting into the box, but the fact that he gave away quite a number of he gave the ball away on quite a number of occasions, and actually in comparison to the last few games where he's been very good going forward, he actually offered very little going forward in this game, and really just epitomised sort of what was an under par performance. So if it was a game that ended at half time, he'd probably get a 6 overall, because he'd done alright defensively but didn't really offer that threat going forward. But the fact that in the second half he's still done relatively good defensively, but obviously left too much space out, and that's obviously how Chelsea scored, and the fact that he gave the ball away a few times was of course a bit disappointing. So I do think it was sort of a game of two halves, in the fact that first half he was very good, with our compact back four, sitting back, absorbing the pressure. I thought he'd done a relatively good job. But in the second half, like I said already, the fact that we scored that goal Chelsea scored the goal so early on into that half was of course a little bit disappointing. Now, obviously, just to go back to the goal, obviously he was the main man tracking N'Golo Kante for the goal, and like I've said already, it was him and Willian who were up against him. So of course you've got to give a bit of blame to Vanano for actually letting Kante actually get into the box and actually get into that position, considering he normally plays quite defensive. And one of the reasons for that is just because he quite simply didn't get close enough to him. Now, we know that Vanano's got the pace to keep up with players, but on this occasion he wasn't quite quick enough to actually let alone actually get to Kante. He wasn't able just to get in that tackle or do anything to stop Kante through on goal, and of course that was a little bit disappointing. And obviously Kante's not known for his shooting, but he obviously was able to get the shot away, so maybe he could have done better there and actually try and put them fire burners on, try and use that pace to get him behind. But that was obviously the only really disappointing thing, if you combine the fact that he gave the ball away and left the space, and that sort of led to Kante actually, or him not tracking Kante for the goal. If you look at the game aside from that, I do think he put in a very serious shift. The fact that he was you know, doing what he had to do for the side, even though he wasn't the greatest at it. The fact that he was still putting in a shift for the side, especially in that first half, is of course you've got to give him credit for. So I do think overall, you know, like I've said, a game of 2 halves. You know, you're looking at his first half performance going probably a 6 out of 10, and obviously, like I've said, the fact that he wasn't tracking Kante for the goal, the fact that he left a little bit too open space on that Chelsea right, and the fact that he just gave the ball away a few times was of course disappointing. But overall, I can't really fault him really for his defensive performance other than the goal we conceded. But like I've said, going forward it was a little bit lacking. So I do think overall a 5 is a fair reflection. And you know, when you consider, you know, a few days ago I was talking about his performance against Cardiff, saying he was very good going forward, albeit with no quality. So of course it looked like he was getting back to his old self, but this game was sort of a step backwards. So if he can get back to his normal self as it was end of last season, and just continue that consistency as opposed to where he's been this season, where he's been up and down, that would of course be great to see. But I do think overall a 5 is a fair result. So I'm going to move on now to the first player in our midfield, and that is of course the captain, Luka Milivojevic, who I'm also going to give a 5 overall. Now, Luka was sort of a hot and cold performance in the fact that he was good in some aspects, but also was a little bit negative, wasn't really that great in others. So I'm obviously going to talk about them in a few details. But a word quite a lot of people use, and I often quite use it, well, especially this season, is just the word anonymous. And I certainly do think that really sort of epitomises Luka's performance in the fact that normally he's getting involved in the midfield both defensively and offensively, but in this game here he was fairly anonymous, not really looking to get involved as much as he used to. And you know, look at the Cardiff game where I thought he was fairly effective. Go back to the Leicester game, you know, where he scored that goal. He was fantastic in that game and he ran the midfield. So of course he's been playing good recently and he looked like he was getting back to his old self, but this was sort of, much like Vanano, it was a step backwards in the fact that his performance wasn't necessarily as great as his performances have been recently. But I suppose one of the main reasons for that is just because Chelsea dominated the midfield, and that's what you come to expect. You know, we expect them to have a lot of the ball, you know, all of the chances more or less in the game, and that's exactly what happens. So in that respect, you can understand him not necessarily being involved as much as he would have liked. But of course, as a fan and you know, knowing his quality and knowing what he can do, you look back at the Man City game against even better opposition. He done superbly against them to actually get that winning goal, give protection to the back four. So of course, we know he's got it in his locker, but unfortunately for us, mainly because of how well Chelsea dominated the midfield, he couldn't quite do it in this occasion here. Now, I think Jorginho in particular is a player that I really want to pick out, in the fact that he was one of the main reasons Chelsea dominated the midfield, is mainly because you know, basically Jorginho took more touches than any other player in the midfield. So that just really goes, that stat in particular goes to show how well Chelsea dominated the midfield, in the fact that Jorginho as an individual had more touches than our whole midfield. So when you've got a player doing that and having so many touches and being so effective in the midfield, albeit he wasn't necessarily creating anything, but when you've got someone who is actually just able to maintain possession, that's obviously going to mean your counterparts in midfield are going to suffer. So in that occasion, obviously Luka was one of the players to suffer. Now, obviously I've talked quite negative already about his performance, but actually going back to the last few weeks or so, I think his passing's been great, and this game was no different here. I do think his passing looked quite sharp in the game. You know, he was looking to get the ball forward, and quite a lot of these balls forward were sort of I suppose pinpoint long balls. So rather than him just passing the ball forward and actually getting someone like Wilf or Vanano or Andros Townsend to actually carry the ball forward, he's actually looking to put these long balls out to the wingers or out to Zaha, whoever basically was in an advanced position. So rather than just doing simple passes, he was actually looking to put quite a few long balls in there. So the fact that even though he had a sort of lacklustre performance, the fact that he still was sharp and was still looking to actually get the ball out wide was of course great to see. Now, obviously, his passing, when he first came to the club, wasn't necessarily the greatest. Yes, we knew that he was alright at sort of short passing, but we didn't necessarily see it. But obviously, at the end of last season, he started to develop it a bit more, and clearly it's sort of something he's been working on. So, of course, beginning of this season in particular, he sort of seemed to have lost it. End of last season, he seemed to be developing it, lost it at the beginning of this season, but he now clearly looks like he's been working on it, and he's back to his best in terms of his passing. So of course, if I had to pick out one positive from the game, it would have been his passing. But I do think overall it was quite a lacklustre performance, quite disappointing. And not disappointing in the fact that he was lacking effort, or he didn't necessarily play bad. It's just the fact that how well Chelsea played in the game. So I can't really fault him for anything in the game. You look at our defence. You could talk about Vanano giving the ball away. You could look at someone like Mamadou Sakho giving the ball away as well. But actually, Luka in particular, other than the fact that he was just under par, there isn't really anything I could really pinpoint and say actually that was quite negative about his game. So I do think overall the 5 I've given him is really a fair reflection of his performance. And like what I said with Vanano, hopefully he can come back to his best, considering the last sort of 4 games or so he seemed to have been getting a lot of confidence and building up sort of a head of steam and actually getting back to how he was before. So hopefully we'll start to see that in the next few games. But like I said already, I do think the 5 I've given him is a fair result. So I'm now going to move on to the second player in the midfield, and that is of course Cheikhou Kouyaté, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. Now something I said after the Cardiff game is the fact that, you know, Cheikhou Kouyaté is becoming really, aside from someone like Wilfried Zaha and Wan-Bissaka, is one of our most important players in the side. And obviously one of the reasons for that is just because of how well he plays in the midfield. You know, the fact that he's got that physicality, that tenacity, and obviously that's why in recent games he's done so well. And I talked about how against Man City, even though we won that game, you know, we were quite worried beforehand because of the influence that Kouyaté has. And of course coming into this game here against Chelsea, for me personally, considering how much Chelsea were going to dominate the game, it was really integral that Kouyaté was playing to his, playing to his A game, playing to his best of his ability. And even though he necessarily wasn't the greatest and certainly wasn't up to the standard he has been in recent games, the fact that he's still put in a shift in the midfield and the fact that he actually worked hard in midfield is something that I was really impressed with, and certainly something which, you know, really highlights to me once again how important he is to the side, and the fact that even when we are under the cosh from a team like Chelsea, the fact that he's able to still come out and actually put in a good performance, showing his tenacity, using his physicality, the fact that he's able to do all of that is of course great to see. Now, like I've said already, he's obviously had better games for in a Palace shirt, and you know, it's not to say necessarily he's had bad games for Palace. It's just the fact that every game he's played to a really high level, and he's fairly consistent. Despite what West Ham fans have told us, he's been very consistent and he's always been at a high level. So the fact that he's doing that for us was of course great to see. Now, the only surprising thing about his performance, and probably one of the reasons why he's limited to a 6, is just the fact that he got taken off quite early on in the game. Personally for me, I thought that James McArthur, who I'll go on to talk about later on, I personally thought that he probably would have come off the bench and, come off for Max Meyer, you know, mainly because I just thought that Kouyaté was having more influence on the game than McArthur did. But of course Roy Hodgson saw something in McArthur that I didn't, and of course saw that, you know, he had to take Kouyaté off. And whether that's because Kouyaté is going to be really integral to the game against Wolves, I'm not quite sure, but I probably think maybe that had something to do with it. But whatever it was, he obviously took him off with about 12 minutes to play. And personally for me, you know, I don't necessarily think he deserved to be taken off, because like I've said already, the fact that he worked hard in the midfield despite that ongoing onslaught from Chelsea was of course, it was good to see him perform so well. So of course it was disappointing to see him when he did come off. But like I've said already, if it is something to do about the Wolves game and the fact that he wants to just make sure that, you know, one of our most important players in Kouyaté can actually play that game and actually be really effective, then if that is his reasoning, then of course I understand it. But if it's to do about changing tactics, I don't necessarily get it, because I think that in this game here, not to say that McArthur was necessarily bad, I just think on the day Kouyaté was just slightly better. Now I suppose in terms of the game itself, and I suppose this is something that could go for the whole midfield, but I'm just going to pick it out here for Kouyaté in particular. And to be honest, he's probably not going to have any more taxing afternoons like this one, and mainly the reason, or one of the reasons for that, is just because of how well Chelsea were playing. And one of the reasons why he had such a taxing afternoon, such an afternoon where he was just literally involved in all of our play, is mainly because he was limited to mostly playing as a defender in front of the back four. So rather than him actually having that free role that he has in the midfield, which allows him to go deep or to drive forward, because we were obviously under the cosh, he obviously meant that he had to spend most of his energy, he had to tax himself in the fact that he obviously had to defend against Chelsea. So yes, it was fairly effective in the first half, and you've got to give him credit because he worked hard, he was, you know, really buckling down and actually doing a really good job in front of the back four. But one of the reasons why he necessarily wasn't as effective going forward as he usually is just because he had to be that defender in front of the back four, basically to nullify Chelsea's threat. Now, obviously we approached the game very negatively, and, you know, understandably that's why you're going to be solid defensively, because obviously you're not necessarily parking the bus as such, but you're playing very deep. And obviously that's great because you stop Chelsea's attacks, but it doesn't allow you that when you go one goal down, you can't get back into the game. And it would have been nice to us sort of open up a bit rather than sitting deep, and rather than us going, actually, you know, we'll play for the 1-0 loss, we should actually just go and approach it. And if we end up losing the game 3-1, that's actually better than us just losing the game 1-0, because at least we would have actually tried to get something from the game. And I certainly do think Kouyaté, if we had sort of changed our approach to the game, you know, maybe it could have been slightly different. But, you know, like I've said already, one of the main reasons why he was limited to his playing a game is just because he had a very taxing afternoon, because he was only limited to doing that defensive work. in front of the back four. But like I've said already, like all of his teammates, and I suppose this is something you could say for the whole team, you know, even though it was slightly disappointing that we lost the game as we did, you know, with a sloppy goal, I think his positioning was excellent in the game, and that was obviously until the points where Chelsea just stretched us a bit too far. So our sort of solid banks of 4-4-2, or, you know, I think it was more of a 4-5-1, but whichever way you look at our formation, that sort of banks of players, that positional awareness, that sort of the spacing between players, that was excellent until the points where Chelsea, or maybe we were just fatigued, or maybe it was just we were tired, but personally for me, I just think it's that Chelsea started to get a little bit more rhythm in the game, especially after getting that first goal. Basically meant they were stretching us more, and obviously we started to sort of lose defensive solidity, or how excellent we were with our position. And so even though we were playing brilliantly, you know, the fact that towards the end of the game maybe we were getting tired, or whether it's just the fact that Chelsea were just getting into the game a little bit more, whatever it was, you know, they did stretch us a bit more as the game went on. But I do think Kante had a very good performance, and even though he wasn't necessarily at his best, the fact that he still worked hard in the midfield was obviously great to see. And for me, it was quite disappointing to see him taken off from Max Meyer with about 12 minutes to play, mainly because I think he maybe could have been a difference with his ability to actually carry the ball from deep and carry it forward. Maybe he could have been a difference for us. But like I've said already, Kante worked hard for the team, but of course was quite limited in this game to what he could do, mainly because his main job was obviously to protect the back four. So I do think the 6 I've given him overall is a fair result. So I'm going to move on now to James McArthur, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. And, you know, I suppose I'm going to mention a few things which I talked about with Kante. But I suppose the first thing to talk about, and there's sort of a similar thing, in the fact that both players were fairly quiet in the game. They wasn't really as effective as they both can be and both have been previously. And of course, you know, much the same as Kante, I think McArthur was one of the reasons why he was quite quiet in midfield, just because of how well Chelsea were playing, just the fact that they dominated that midfield, and the fact that they won that midfield battle. So that's quite understandable as a reason why, you know, McArthur didn't necessarily play well. But much like Kante, once again, I'm going to be comparing these two, because I do think they had sort of similar performances in the fact that he still got stuck in. He was obviously helping us to keep our shape. And, you know, against that threat that Chelsea were having, the fact that we stayed quite solid, we were all positionally very good, very solid. The fact that we've done that, you've got to give credit to the midfielders, especially in that first half, because obviously they played quite a crucial role in terms of us actually, you know, sort of nullifying that threat that Chelsea have. So even though McArthur had a slightly quieter game by his standards, the fact that he was still getting involved, looking to get stuck in, and just helping us to have that sort of solidity defensively that we did in that first half was of course great to see. Now obviously his midfield performance wasn't necessarily that great because he wasn't involved because of, you know, how well Chelsea were dominating the game. But I suppose the only good side from his performance, and this is much the same as Kante, is just the fact that defensively he was very good. So the fact that him and Kante were giving excellent protection to the back four was of course great to see. But because of that, they were really limited going forward. So it would have been nice to see them actually still do that defensive work, but actually see them go a little bit more further forward, be a little bit more adventurous, because maybe we could have seen something in the game if we hadn't, or got something from it, if we hadn't had that sort of very negative approach in the fact that we'd just sit back and actually try and just hit them on the counter. So rather than doing that, we maybe should have approached them more. And I do think that's not necessarily down to McArthur or Kante in particular, but I do certainly think that actually they had such a good defensive performance that, you know, I suppose if they had concentrated on going forward a little bit more, then maybe there could have been something different from the game. But I suppose one of the main reasons why I was quite impressed with McArthur's performance, given the fact that we were playing quite negative, is the fact that he seems to relish the responsibilities that come with that 4-5-1 formation. Now, this is something I saw someone put online, and I actually really did agree with it, so I thought I'd put it in there. And it's just the fact that McArthur in a 4-4-2 normally plays out wide, but when you play a 4-5-1 formation, it means that he actually plays as part of the midfield three, and I certainly do think he's a little bit more effective in that role, and he does relish the opportunity or relish the responsibilities of doing both defensive and offensive work. And yes, he didn't have much to do offensively in this game, but defensively, that responsibility, I think he done really well. He sort of is a player who has that tenacity, has that, you know, has a fantastic stamina. So the fact that you've got someone like that who relishes these responsibilities was of course great to see. And, you know, obviously against the bigger sides recently, Hodgson plays this formation of 4-5-1 because it packs out the midfield. And, you know, one of the reasons why we do quite well against them, not necessarily always getting results, you know, bar, say, the Arsenal game, the Man United game, or the Man City game. Obviously, you don't necessarily always get results against top teams, but that formation just gives us a really solid base, and certainly McArthur in particular seems to be playing well in that position. And I do think, even though he can do a shift in a 4-4-2 out wide, when we play this formation, whether that be the 4-3-3 variant or the 4-5-1 variant, whenever we play a similar formation like that, where McArthur's playing a little bit more central, he seems to do better in his role. But I do think, overall, like his teammates, yes, he was overrun by a very much superior midfield in terms of the Chelsea lineup, but nevertheless, I still think he put a shift in, and that's what you want to see from players, because if you're going up against a team who just have totally, basically they have a lot more quality than you have in certain positions, of course you're going to get overrun and not necessarily play as well as you normally do. But the fact that MacArthur and Kante and Luca, the fact that these guys actually still went about and tried to do their best for the team is exactly what you want to see. So James MacArthur here, I do think a 6 is a fair result in the fact that he was very, very good defensively, sort of lacked that forward play, and one of the reasons he was really restricted in the game is just because of how well Chelsea dominated the game. So I do think overall, on reflection, I do consider a fair result. So I'm going to move on now to one of our forward players, and obviously, depending on which way you look at the formation, you could say that Jeffrey Slupp was playing as a winger in this game in the 4-5-1, or you could say in the 4-3-3. When we were pushing at the end of the game, maybe you could argue that he was playing in a wide role. Now, whichever way you look at it, he's one of our most forward players in this game here, and certainly didn't have one of the best performances. So Jeffrey Slupp here, I'm going to give him a 5 overall. Now, obviously, before the game, there was quite a lot of debate as to who would start the game, mainly because we'd played, team against Man City. We changed a team because Kante came back in it against Cardiff. And of course, there was quite a lot of question marks as opposed to we got a 0-0 draw against Cardiff, so would we change anything for Chelsea? Now, the only change we did make was obviously Jeffrey Slupp coming in for Max Meyer, and even though many people were surprised of that, maybe you could understand it, because Meyer, I think, is a player that is going to be really crucial against Wolves tomorrow. So, of course, maybe if he was just conserving him, that was great. But considering Jeffrey Slupp's sort of been hot and cold this season, bar the goals he's scored, he's been, really, really cold. It was not really filled people with much sort of optimism, let's say, for the game. And I do think that one of the reasons why Hodgson brought Slupp back into the lineup is mainly just to give a little bit more cover and to hold our defensive shape. And even though that makes perfectly good sense, it goes back to the fact that we played such a negative game, we approached the game so negatively, which basically meant people like Slupp, even though they were there to do good things, in the fact that they provided us with cover and gave us a defensive shape, because we were playing so defensively, it sort of neglected that, and really we didn't really see anything of note really from Jeffrey Slupp throughout the game. And certainly when you consider the goals he scored recently, on the counter-attack in particular, even though we didn't have many of them, he could have been in the game, in that position, but he didn't do that. And when you consider someone with the creativity of Meyer was actually dropped to the bench, and we brought on someone like Jeffrey Slupp, who, other than his pace, hasn't necessarily got, and his defensive work hasn't necessarily got that creativity that Meyer has. When you consider you take someone like that out on the counter-attack, you're really going to suffer because you haven't got that creativity. So I suppose that's something to pick out from the game, in the fact that, yes, we don't necessarily, or I personally don't think Slupp is anywhere near good enough to start every game. He might be a good impact sub, not necessarily good enough to start every game. So when you have someone like him and he comes into the side as opposed to one of your most creative players, there's going to be, you're going to really suffer in the game, and certainly that was the thing here. Now, of course, I could talk about the negative approach to the game and why that really sort of limited Slupp, in the fact that he didn't really play well, mainly because of the formation and just the fact that he's not necessarily as good as, say, Meyer was. But I think one of the reasons why his performance was disappointing, and certainly I've seen a few people say this, it's just because he was guilty of giving the ball away quite cheaply at times. So, like I've said, with quite a number of players in this game here against Chelsea, Chelsea are going to have a lot of the ball, so of course, understandably, you don't want to give them even more of it. So of course it's disappointing when players like Slupp, players like Vanano actually give the ball away so cheaply. You're basically just giving away possession to Chelsea, not like they need anymore, but you're just giving it away to them so cheaply. And, like I've said already, the second point really is the fact that even though he was playing on the left wing or left midfield, whichever way you want to look at that sort of position, he obviously was mainly there to provide that defensive cover and help us to, hold that defensive shape. But when we go on the counter-attack, you've got people like Wilf, Wan-Bissaka, Andros Townsend actually pushing forward. They were doing everything right, albeit not effective. So you've got someone like Jeffrey Slupp who failed to even provide a threat going forward. So even though we know that he's got the ability in terms of his pace, we didn't quite see it in this game here. Now, whether it's just the fact that the way we had to approach the game, that negative approach, maybe that's something that sort of hindered Slupp going forward, but whatever it was still disappointing to see his performance, in the fact that he didn't necessarily do too much defensively and was giving the ball away. And when you combine that with the fact that on the rare chances we did get forward, he wasn't actually proving a threat, that was of course disappointing. But I suppose the one positive I can take from this game is that he actually did attempt to sort of play the game as sort of a box-to-box midfielder. Now, obviously, he's playing out wide, so he's not exactly the typical box-to-box midfielder. But that sort of performance, that sort of approach to the game, is maybe something I can give a little bit of credit for, because I do think a 5, maybe 4 or 5 could be sort of his performance rating overall. But I do think the fact that he was doing that box-to-box midfield role, and actually on that sort of odd occasion, he was actually looking to be an extra man in front of Zaha. So yes, obviously he wasn't a threat going forward, but that few times, them few occasions where he was actually doing that box-to-box role, whilst also actually getting forward and just providing that extra man to play off with Zaha, that was great to see. And I suppose that's literally his only positive from the game. But when you consider, you know, the quality that Meyer has, the creativity he has, you know, Jeffrey Stark is not that player. So even though he was trying to be that box-to-box player, trying to be that man to play off Zaha, he can't play that pivotal role. He can't be the focal point of our midfield to actually get the ball to the attack, mainly because he's just not good enough. You know, he's good playing at left back, good at playing in midfield in a 4-5-1, but actually playing the role he is at the minute, if he doesn't actually look to get forward, he's basically anonymous in the game. And certainly that was, you know, that was sort of the theme here. And I suppose a phrase to use is sort of on a hiding to nothing. And that was exactly his performance here. You know, obviously it wasn't necessarily that he was terrible in the game, but hiding onto nothing, wasn't really doing anything in the game, wasn't really going to give anything to the game, and overall a very disappointing performance. So I do think a 5 overall is a fair reflection of his game. You know, other than the fact that he played that box-to-box role and had that performance relatively good, and the fact that he played off Zaha on a few occasions, the fact that he didn't provide us that sort of attacking flair and that creativity that he came into the side, he replaced Meyer, so you're going to expect him to try and at least replicate that. The fact that he didn't do that, and the fact that even though he gave us a little bit more cover and helped us to hold the defensive shape, the fact that his overall defensive performance, or his overall performance, wasn't necessarily that great, and the fact that he gave the ball away really was why it sort of epitomises why his performance was overall disappointing. But I do think overall 5 is a fair reflection. Do comment below with your thoughts, and obviously do comment below whether you do think that Meyer comes in for the next game. So I'm going to move on now to our first, or I suppose, okay, let's say 4-4-2, we're looking at our first of our 2 attacking players. 4-5-1, we're looking at our final player in the midfield. Whichever way you look at it, Andros Townsend, whether he was playing as a forward or a winger in this game, whichever way you look at him, going to move on to him now, and I'm actually going to give him a 6 overall for his performance. Now, Townsend's been one of our best players this season, and certainly in December he's got to be up there with one of our players of the month, mainly because of the goals he scored, but also because of his attacking contributions. So the fact that he's had such a good December, coming into this game here at the end of December, the fact that he was able to perform as well as he did in a performance which was quite sort of drab and quite negative from the whole rest of the side was of course great to see. So the fact that we've got someone like this who can rise above the performance of the team and still put in a relatively good performance, considering sort of the negative approach of other players in the side, was of course great to see. Now, one of the things I most liked about his performance was particularly when he was playing down the right hand side, and that was just a few of his nice tricks and actually bursts of pace down the right hand side. Now, obviously at the beginning of the season we were saying, come on Andros, you know, put more balls into the box and actually try and look and get a little bit more involved, and certainly in December in particular we've seen him do that a lot more. You know, we've seen him actually link up well with Wan-Bissaka, actually Wan-Bissaka providing 1-2s to allow Townsend to burst into space. We've seen him actually trying to run onto the ball a lot more. We've seen him playing, or I suppose not playing necessarily just down the middle, but drifting between positions. So we've actually seen an improvement in this game recently, and even though he isn't a forward player, he's obviously a winger or a wide midfielder. Even though that is the case, I think one of the reasons his performances have improved so much is just because he's got that fluidity to actually change between positions, and certainly that was quite evident in the game here, in the fact that he had loads of nice touches, loads of bursts down the right, and actually, considering it was such a negative performance, the fact that he was involved in our stuff going forward, or most of our stuff going forward, was of course great to see. Now, of course, much like most players in this game here, there's obviously negatives. I do think on a few occasions, much like loads of players, was actually guilty of giving the ball away or playing the wrong pass. So rather than passing the ball to Wilf, or rather than say giving the ball to someone like Wan-Bissaka, for example, rather than doing that, he maybe made the wrong decision. So it wasn't necessarily in the fact that he was misplacing passes, in the fact that they weren't going to anywhere. It's just the fact that his decision making was a little bit wrong on a few occasions, hence why he gave the wrong pass. But that really was only a small part of his game, because I do think the main part of his game was nice tricks and then burst down the right. So even though our performance wasn't that quite lackluster, especially in the defensive side, you know, our defensive performance, you're looking at maybe a 7 overall. Our attacking performance, you're probably looking at a 4 But the fact that Townsend still rose upon it and still tried to put in a good performance was, of course, great to see. Now, recently, I suppose a phrase to use is a purple patch, because that's exactly what Townsend's form has been at the minute. He's been hot and cold, this season, scored a few goals in the League Cup, went a bit quiet for a while. Then he's obviously, December, he's scored absolute screamers. So the fact he's now in this purple patch playing really well is, of course, great to see. And it seems to have done his confidence the world of good in the fact that he's been a bit hot and cold, but now he's got a few goals, performing consistently. He seems to, be building upon that, and as the more games go on, he seems to be getting even more confident. So of course that's great to see. And even though in this game here against Chelsea, he was obviously left to feed on the scraps and actually run from deep positions, because of that onslaught from Chelsea, he obviously had to go quite deep. So the fact that he was still able to actually take the ball from deep and still go forward and actually have these bursts down the right hand side, the fact that he was still able to do that even though we were under the cosh and even though we were playing so negative, is something great to see. So yeah, Andros Townsend here, yes, he didn't necessarily get any goal or any really clear-cut chances in the game, but the fact that he had nice touches, he was always looking to burst down the right-hand side, as well as even though we were playing quite negative, he was still able to carry the ball from deep and actually go forward, was of course great to see. And as one of our forward players, when you consider he basically had the scraps to feed off of, he didn't really have as much of the ball as he would have liked. Even though that was the case, the fact that he was still looking to get involved was of course great to see. So I do think Andros Townsend here, certainly one of our nominations for Player of the Month, and personally for me, I did vote for him. I did have a top 3, and I obviously voted for Townsend because he's been absolutely fantastic in December. So obviously credit to him, and long may it continue, because he seems to be building that confidence up. So hopefully that can obviously carry on for the next few games and obviously for the rest of the season. So I'm going to move on now to our final player, and that is of course Wilfried Zaha, who I'm going to give a 5 overall. Now, much like what I've been saying about Wilf recently, and the fact that he's going on, I think it's a 12-game spell now where he hasn't got a goal in a game, and of course that's a little bit disappointing as he's one of our focal points in the attack. And this game was no different in the fact that it was disappointing, he didn't quite get a goal. And unlike the Cardiff game, where I still gave him credit because I thought he was fairly good offensively, when you compare him in this game here against Chelsea, compare him to someone like Townsend, he was considerably less effective, let's say. So even though against Cardiff, our offensive performance wasn't great, but we still posed a threat to Cardiff going forward. But in this game here, it was the complete opposite in the fact that Zaha wasn't really looking to get involved as much as he did, let's say, in that game against Cardiff, where we weren't necessarily the best going forward. Now, of course, he sort of cut a frustrated figure at times, and that's understandable. If you've got a player, he's literally, the ball's not really getting to him, he's not really getting that many touches. And when you've got someone who's normally a winger but is playing centrally, so he has to play with his back to goal, when you've got someone like that whose main ability is to actually run past players and actually use his skill and pace to get past them, when you've got someone who's actually up against a defender, has to try and hold them off as opposed to running past them, that's of course going to affect your play. And of course here against Chelsea, 2 physical centre-backs, you've got physical full-backs as well. So of course you're going to struggle, if you're playing your back towards goal, you're going to struggle to get past them. And that's why, Zaha was a frustrated figure in the game. It's mainly because he couldn't really get involved, mainly because we were basically parking the bus, we were just playing him alone up top. And basically meant we were just pumping long balls to him, and obviously because he was so isolated meant that he couldn't really get into the game, couldn't really get anything from these chances, and it's quite understandable. Obviously it's not great to see him not playing well, but when you're playing so negatively, you're not getting the ball to the forwards quick enough, or you're not having enough possession to actually build any reasonable counter-attacks, obviously you're going to understand that players are going to suffer. But obviously he had a few precious sort of opportunities in the game, obviously to run at defenders and obviously have sights on goal, but when he did, he was quite wasteful. So there was a few chances where he probably should have, his finishing should have been better. And of course, there's other chances where, the Chelsea defence, they were obviously solid, they had a clean sheet, and they were playing well as well. So it was a mixture of the fact that he was quite wasteful, but also the fact that he was quite isolated. They were defending quite well, Chelsea, and that was one of the 2 reasons why he had few opportunities to actually run at the defenders in the first place, or even have sights on goal. But like I've said already, the last few weeks or so, even though he hasn't necessarily been playing great, the fact that he's still looking to get involved is good. But like I've said, in this game here, when he did actually get involved, he was quite wasteful. Now, one of the main reasons why he didn't necessarily play as good as he did against Cardiff or as he did against Man City is just because Chelsea were defending well, and they didn't give well, I suppose they didn't give him individually space in behind, but they didn't give Palace as a team space in behind. So none of our players, you know, you look at McCarthy, who loves to make runs into the box, you look at Townsend, you look at Jeffrey Slop, you look at Fernando, players who like to get forward. We weren't really given any space in behind to actually have any chances in that Chelsea box, or have any chances to actually get the ball in the box. So when your opposition is playing so well that they're not actually giving you that space in behind, that's obviously going to hurt you. And especially on the break, which we didn't get that many counter attacks. So when we did get them, the fact that they obviously done well and actually didn't allow us that space to actually make anything meaningful obviously seemed to affect us. And you know, as the game went on, Zaha in particular seemed to tire, the whole team seemed to tire. So of course, even though we were pumping pressure on Chelsea the last sort of 5-10 minutes or so to actually try and get back into the game, it was too little too late, and by that point we were a bit lethargic, a bit tired, which basically meant that we obviously tired as the game went on, but actually when it came to it, when we had chances through on goal, because of that tiredness, we couldn't really be that clinical overall. But I suppose I've got to play devil's advocate here and go that yes, Zaha's performance wasn't great, but one of the other reasons for that is just because he was double marked for the most of it. So teams now know how much of a threat he is, and you know, you look back to the Cardiff game, they had to play a back five to actually defend against us. Obviously Chelsea here playing a back four, 2 physical centre backs, 2 physical full backs. So of course for much of the game he was obviously double marked, and when you combine that with little or no support, of course you're going to struggle. But I think one of the main reasons he did struggle in this game is not because he was playing alone up top, or because he was quite isolated. It's just because our game plan sort of really limited his effectiveness, and the fact that we had to play so deep meant that we couldn't go forward. And even when we did go forward, because we had to start our attacks from very, very deep in our own half, basically meant that if anything meaningful did come from it, it was too little too late, because Chelsea had had time to sort of reorganise and stuff. So Zaha in particular is a player who likes to thrive by getting the ball to feet, running at players, but because he was playing as that lone striker with his back towards goal, it seemed to affect his performance overall. So I do think, you know, a 5 was a fair result, and certainly he's a player who's on a bit of a bad form at the minute. It's not to say that he's been absolutely terrible this season. Much like what I said with McCarthy a few weeks ago, he's just been consistently very average this season. You know, he started the season really well, but he seems to have dropped down now. But if he could have a game, even if he doesn't really necessarily play that well against Wolves at the weekend, if we can have a performance where he just comes back and actually does what he done against Cardiff, like against Man City as well, where he doesn't necessarily score or assist, but he actually just poses a threat to the opposition and causes them problems. If he can do that, unlike what he did here against Chelsea, where he was completely anonymous in the game, that would of course be great to see. So Zaha here, another disappointing performance from him, but obviously one of the main reasons for that is just because of how we played overall as a team. So I'm going to move on now to the 2 subs, obviously starting with Connor Wickham. Came on for Jeffrey Slop on the 68th minute, and I'm going to give him a 6 overall. Now, one of the main reasons we made this change is because we're 1-0 down. Obviously, we want to try and get something from the game. And ultimately, one of the reasons you bring on Connor Wickham, or you bring Sorloth, or you bring on Benteke when he's back, is basically just to give us a focal point up top. And certainly Connor Wickham done that, so that was the first thing. His first job was to give us a focal point to the attack. Tick that off, he'd done that really well, and the fact that he'd done that whilst also causing some problems for Chelsea with just that addition of the physical presence to the side was of course great to see. And you know, it just goes back to the point, you know, at the beginning of the season, you know, we were getting really frustrated in the fact that Hodgson wasn't making any subs, or the fact that he was making them in the 90th minute or so. And this substitution, even though it's been earlier than at the beginning of the season where he was making subs in the 85th, 90th minute or so, yes, this was relatively early in the fact that he was in the 68th minute, but as soon as we conceded that first goal on 50 minutes or so, even 55 minutes, we should have brought Connor Wickham on, because the impact he made from 68 minutes onwards was great. And the fact that we as fans could see it, surely Hodgson could have seen that it weren't working, we had gone 1 goal down, and maybe he should have actually just brought on that focal point earlier on in the game. Because when you consider, when Wickham came on in the last sort of 2 or 3 games, or the last 2 games or so, he's come on and he's actually made a difference. So you come into this game here against Chelsea, you've got to play him in that, you've got to bring him on earlier, because he's made such a big difference in them last few games by being that focal point. So of course that's what we needed against Chelsea, so it would have been nice to see him come earlier on. Now of course he had one big chance to obviously score, and he blazed it over from close range. And there was another one where he was quite unlucky that his snapshot just went over. So he's had 2 chances there where he probably should have done better with. But the fact that he's actually getting chances in the game, which we didn't have in the earlier parts of the game, really just goes to show the impact he has. And it just goes along with the fact that, we had a focal point to our attack, so when we were going forward it was more meaningful because we actually had something to aim for. So it just goes to show that if we actually have a focal point, chances are going to come. So the fact that he had more chances in that short time he was on the field than we had in the whole game really just goes to show the impact he has. Now, one of the things I liked about him, and this really goes back to the reason why I think he needs to start next game, or why I just think he's such effective off the bench if he can stay injury free, is just the fact that he doesn't seem as one-dimensional as Sorloth or Ayew. Now, obviously when it comes to late subs, you want them either to just hold out the game or to make an impact. In this instance here, we wanted them to make an impact. Now, someone like Sorloth might be good at carrying the ball, but he's quite a big lump and he doesn't necessarily seem to be as clinical as he once was. And obviously Ayew, we could talk about him all day. He's got a good work rate, doesn't seem to have that quality. So the fact that Wickham doesn't seem as one-dimensional as these guys by having just one thing they're good at, the fact that Wickham's got that is great to see, but it would have been nice to see it a little bit earlier on in the game. But overall, I do think he works hard for the team, and the fact that he's a target man, and the fact that he actually influences and changes the game is great to see. So hopefully in the coming games or so we can start to see him introduced more. And I think obviously, you know, it's going to be 50-50 as to whether he'll start against Wolves, because Hodgson's either seen him and gone, you know, yes, you're making an impact now off the bench, so if we can play like we did against Chelsea for the last 85 minutes, if we can play like that against Wolves, we're actually, you know, drastically improve our attacking play in the game. But if we don't play him, then we need to, even if we don't play him, we need to just bring him on earlier, because he's making such a good impact that we need to get him involved more in the team. And obviously, touch wood, he can obviously, you know, he seems now, the last sort of few weeks or so, he seems to have overcome his injuries. So hopefully he can actually continue that, because he seems to be a fairly useful player for us. Obviously, Max Meyer was a player who obviously got dropped in the game for Jeffrey Schlupp. Obviously, he came off the bench for Kante in the 78th minute, and much like Connor Wickham, made a relatively good impact, so I'm going to give him a 6 overall. Now, to be honest, it was obviously a surprise not to see him start the game, and I've already talked quite a lot about it. And it just showed, this sort of game here showed that actually that 4-5-1 formation can't actually function without him, because I've talked about already. Yes, McArthur and Kante done a really good job defensively, but because of how negative the approach was, we couldn't really have that thing going forward. So if we'd added Max Meyer in there, we would have had a bit more of that creativity, and actually on our sort of rare for race forward, we could have actually created more from it if we had our creative player in Max Meyer playing there. Now, the thing that really impressed me with him coming off the bench is just the fact that he provided that link that was missing between Wilfried Zaha and the rest of the team. So I talked about the 4-5-1, playing quite deep. That obviously meant that Zaha was playing as a low man up top. But when we brought Max Meyer on, and when obviously other players pushed up to try and get that equaliser, obviously meant that all of a sudden we were playing so better. So I don't know if it was obvious to Hodgson, but it's quite obvious to all of us fans, is the fact that when you bring Meyer on, you get that creativity and you get that link between them, the rest of the team, and of course your attacking player in Zaha. So the fact that Zaha improved when Meyer came on with that creativity really just goes to show how important he is. And much like Kante mainly for his defensive work and the ability to drive forward, Max Meyer is just as important to the midfield because of his creativity as well. And you know, the fact that he gave Wilfried Zaha a real lift when he came on and he seemed to improve, and considering they apparently had this argument, you know, we saw that when Meyer decided to shoot as opposed to cross, obviously Zaha was having a bit of a go at him, but I don't really think there's anything really to read into that. Obviously you're going to be frustrated if your teammate doesn't make the right decision, so the fact that Meyer came on and had such a positive impact for Zaha in particular really just goes to show how good he was. But the main reason I was really impressed with his performance is just because of how all of his balls into the box, whether they be crosses or little ping balls or 1-2s, they were all very crisp, they were all purposeful. So the fact they were all going to the right places, all were sort of going into positions which could have created something, was of course great to see. And I do think, and I don't really want to make it quite extreme, but if he had started the game, maybe we would not have lost 1-0. Maybe we would have lost 3-1, or, you know, if you're looking at maybe 2-1, or whatever variation of the score you want to look at, maybe we wouldn't have lost the game 1-0 if we'd had that creativity of Meyer. Because I do certainly think, like Wickham making that influence off the bench by having that focal point, if we'd had the creativity of Meyer to actually link up the rest of the team to Wilfried Zaha, maybe it would have been a different game. And even if we'd gone on to still lose the game, we would have had a much better game in terms of our attacking play. So overall, both our subs were very effective, and both of them really, for me personally and other fans as well, do certainly need to be considered to actually start their next game as opposed to make an impact off the bench, because they've both shown in this game here are actually, in the small time they were on the pitch, they actually were more effective than some of our other players overall. So just to go over a small sort of summary of the game, you know, obviously I've talked quite a lot about our negative approach to the game, but the one thing you've got to give credit for that approach to the game is just the fact that we were set up to be disciplined, which we exactly were that, and we were set up to be organised. So the fact that we've done that and we were fairly solid defensively, only conceded the one where other teams against Chelsea have conceded loads. Obviously that's great to see, but because we were so negative, it basically meant that we paid Chelsea too much respect, and when they were able to get that boot to make it 1-0, because we were playing so negative, we weren't able to actually hit back at them and actually get something else from the game. Now, of course, it's a bit disappointing, the result, but it's not because of how the team played. Obviously, defensively, we were absolutely fine, you know, a 7 out of 10 there, but it was just the way that we were set up. So we played relatively well defensively. Offensively, because of that formation, because of that way we were set up, was one of the reasons why we're disappointing. And our sort of approach to the game was basically only going to invite Chelsea to go on us and actually hog possession. And to be honest, it was always inevitable that we were going to lose the game only by small margins, mainly because we were going to sit back, we were going to defend really well, but then when they did make the breakthrough, because of that approach, we couldn't really have anything to get really back into the game. And really, it was a stroll in the park for Chelsea. We didn't really put any pressure on them. The only pressure we put on them was not from an offensive perspective, but it was just the fact that we were defending so well, which basically there was pressure on Chelsea to actually try and throw everything they can at us to actually try and get that breakthrough, which they eventually did. And you know, really, Chelsea didn't really necessarily have to go full gears, mainly because they just eventually, by just persisting with what they were doing, they were able to break through. Now, like I've said already, going back to the subs, it was only when both Wickham and Meyer came on, and of course that change of formation which moved Wilf out wide, it was only when that happened where our approach to the game changed, and we were actually looking to counter-attack, and we were actually looking to open up the team and open up our formation, open up our approach to the game and actually start attacking. So the fact that we just made 2 changes off the bench and changed the formation, which was neglecting Wilf to actually allowing Wilf to go to where he thrives, that little change could have been made so much earlier in the game, even after we conceded that first goal, a minute after. If we had made that change earlier, then maybe something would have changed. But the fact that we left it so late meant that we were already chasing the game, the pressure was on us, and with only a quarter of the game left, we couldn't really get anything from the game overall. But just go back to the Chelsea game, if you compare that to the Man City game, compare that to the Chelsea game here, why didn't we do what we done against City? Yes, we were still very solid defensively against City, but we were still looking to attack from minute 1. So if we hadn't have been so defensive from the get-go here against Chelsea, maybe we would have got something from the game. And even if it was 2-1 or 3-2, whatever the scoreline may be, if we'd actually just try and actually bring the game to Chelsea, as opposed to just surrendering and just defending well, if we'd actually tried to throw something at them, even if we go on to lose the game, that would have been better, as opposed to not getting anything from the game. Because you look at the City game, we could have lost that game because we were trying to throw stuff at City to get the lead in the game. So we showed against Cardiff that we can attack teams, even though we didn't finish them chances. So if we had at least done that and at least created chances against Chelsea, even if we didn't score, if we'd actually just at least try and throw something at them like we did against Cardiff, albeit it weren't successful, maybe something would have happened from the game. But like I've said already, you bring the subs on, that really changed sort of the attacking momentum of the game. And to be honest, I think it's something that the fact that we were able to maintain our defensive solidity, other than the goal we conceded, and obviously the 2 ones which were ruled out offside. If you look aside from that, we maintained our defensive solidity throughout the whole game. So if we had just done that and actually just thrown everything at the attack and actually had that momentum of having 30 shots in the last game, had that momentum going forward, then maybe there would have been a different story here. Now for me, I'm just going to sort of summarise really. I normally feel that Roy's tactics, albeit this season I've been criticising them a little bit more because they seem to be a little bit more negative or not as effective as last season were. And I do think they're normally pretty much on the button. Normally 7 out of 10 from Roy in terms of tactics, setting out the team is alright. And whether we win, lose or draw, that's normally the case. But today I just think he was a bit too timid, he was a bit too weak in the fact that he didn't try and attack the opposition, and a bit too negative. So in the game against Wolves at the weekend, on Wednesday, they're a really good team. They play really, really well against the top teams. So realistically, we've got to class them as like a top 7 side. So if we play like we did against Chelsea, we're probably going to get a 1-0 loss. But if we play like we did against Man City, we might have a chance against him. Because if we play defensively solid like we did against Man City, and we still have a going forward, even if we don't get anything from the game, if we just have that solid base and actually try and attack the opposition, then maybe something will come from it. But of course, we'll wait and see what happens, but hopefully Roy can see it and the players have been working on it, so hopefully we'll have a better performance against Wolves on Wednesday. So now I'm going to move on to my Man of the Match award, but before I do that and give you my Man of the Match and why I thought the biggest influence in the game, I'm now going to give you the 4 nominations I put forward for the award. Now when you consider quite how lacklustre our performance was, not necessarily the defensive side of our game, but of course going forward in the fact that we were playing so negative that we didn't necessarily have any outlets going forward. When you consider that was the case, it was really quite difficult to actually pick someone for the Man of the Match award, mainly because of just how negative our approach was, and obviously the fact that most of our good play was only defensively. So of course it was difficult to pick players from the game, but as you probably heard in the the player ratings, in the fact that some players done better than others, there are a few players I could pick out, and certainly I've narrowed it down to 4. Now obviously there might be, you might agree with some, you might think some players don't deserve to be in here, but I do think these 4 players do deserve to be on here, just because in a game which was quite lacklustre, quite below par, these players obviously did stand out for me. So I've gone with Aaron Wan-Bissaka and James Tomkins in the defence, and of course from the sub bench I've gone with Connor Wickham and Max Meyer. So of course, when you consider how good we were defensively, it was quite obvious that I was going to pick 2 defensive players. And when you consider the impact that both Connor Wickham and Max Meyer made off the bench, you've got to have them 2 bench players on there, because they really changed our complexion of the game, and certainly made our game approach a little bit more, or a little bit less negative than it had been previously. So I think these 4 players really are a reflection of how our game was. Now in terms of Wan-Bissaka, once again he's always our standout player, and of course it's, nearly every week he's on this shortlist, but the main reason he's on the Man of the Match shortlist is just because of how well he dealt with Eden Hazard. So you've got a world-class player here, and the fact that Wan-Bissaka, given his inexperience, albeit we're not surprised because he's dealt with loads of wingers so well, but the fact that he dealt with him so well was of course great to see. And not just the fact that he dealt with him well by just limiting his chances, the fact that the few chances he had were just Hazard sort of picking up the scraps on the edge of the area, and the fact that that's all he was left to was of course great to see. But like he always does, he made lots of tackles and showed maturity and actually had that positional awareness to go forward. So the fact that he had these 3 things in particular really sort of helped his game, and really did epitomise why we could have got something from the game if our approach to the game had been a little bit more negative. You've got players like Wan-Bissaka playing really, really well. So if we hadn't played so negative, then maybe we would have had a chance going forward. But like I've said already, the fact that Wan-Bissaka done so well defensively, done so well against Eden Hazard, showed maturity when you consider he's the youngest player on the pitch, and had that positional awareness to actually go forward but know when to go back. The fact that he had that was of course really impressive. Now James Tomkins, obviously, like I've said, defensively we were not, I wouldn't say fantastic, but we were quite good in the game, and the fact that we dealt with Chelsea's threats for the majority of the game, and I do think Tomkins was quite key to that. Giroud in particular, he dealt with him really well and actually kept him out of the game, and other than the 2 offside goals that Giroud scored, basically he had no chances in the game. So the fact that, number 1, Tomkins done so well against one player in particular to actually keep him out of the game was of course great to see. But then secondly, the fact that Tomkins just overall was very effective in his defensive work, basically stopped most, not if anything or everything, of Chelsea's attacks, as well as just generally making it difficult for them by making blocks and challenges like he always does. The fact that he was able to do that was of course great to see, and much like what I said with Wan-Bissaka, Tomkins and Wan-Bissaka both deserve credit for this game, and certainly to be on this shortlist, mainly because of their defensive performance. So this season, if our defensive performances matched our attacking performances, we would be top 10 right now. But at the moment our defensive performances are great, but our offensive performances aren't. So of course, once again, the defensive performance is great, and from these players, 2 players in particular, but of course the forward players couldn't quite match it. Now in terms of the 3rd player, Connor Wickham, like I've said in the player ratings, the fact that he came off the bench and actually made an impact, in the fact that he gave us that focal point up top, the fact that he had more chances than many of our other players had throughout the whole game was of course great to see, and the fact that he just gave a problem to the Chelsea defenders which they didn't actually have up against them previously, by actually bringing that physical presence onto the field was of course great to see. So the fact that he came off the bench, played as well as he did, whilst also just working hard for the team and just providing or being that target man, which we obviously missed early on in the game, was of course great to see. And the same could go to Max Meyer, you know, making an impact off the bench. The fact that he came off the bench and actually provided that link between Zaha and the rest of the team, which was missing throughout the whole game, was of course great to see. And that just goes back to his creativity. So the fact that he came off the bench and gave us that creativity which we had missed in the game, the fact that he had that much impact on the game was of course great to see. And when you consider for both subs, the fact that the last sort of 5 minutes or so and into stoppage time, so you're looking at sort of the final 10 minutes or so, when you consider we were literally pumping everything at it to try and get at Chelsea, if we'd done that slightly earlier with players like Wickham and Meyer making an impact off the bench, then maybe we could have got back into the game. But like I said already, Max Meyer, great influence off the bench. Passing, as always, was very crisp and purposeful. And the fact that if he had actually started the game, it probably wouldn't have been 1-0. So the fact that he had so much influence that, given the small time he was on the pitch, if we had had that for the whole time, maybe the game would have changed. So for me, personally, all of these players, you know, Wan-Bissaka, Tompkins, Wickham, Meyer, obviously all deserve credit and certainly deserve to be on the shortlist for man of the match. Obviously Wan-Bissaka and Tompkins for their defensive work, and Wickham and Meyer for their work off the bench. But for me, there's only one clear winner, and this may be a bit surprising, but James Tompkins is going to win it this week. So congratulations, James. You don't get a trophy or certificate, but you do get my sincere congratulations on what was yet again a very solid defensive performance from you. But the main thing that, you know, why I've given it to him as opposed to someone like Wan-Bissaka or Wickham or Meyer, is just because he shone out for me in the fact that how well he dealt with Giroud individually, but also just of how effective he was for the most part. So Chelsea normally score 3 or 4 goals against, you know, most teams in the league. So the fact that we, you know, Tompkins in particular, done so well defensively to actually do really well defensively up against them, and the fact that he barely misplaced a pass and actually was looking to get in the box to actually get on the end of set pieces as well. So the fact that he was doing his defensive work, man marking certain players, just nullifying threat, as well as actually proving a threat from set pieces as well. The fact that he had that really for me is why he does deserve the award. But do comment below with your thoughts, whether you do think any players do deserve it, or whether you do disagree with the shortlist I've come up with. But, you know, I certainly do think that James Tompkins deserves to win it, but obviously the, you know, mentions must go to Wan-Bissaka, Wickham and Meyer. So now you've heard my match report, player rankings and my man of the match. That concludes this week's podcast. Now I've got interviews with Roy Hodgson and Luka Milivojevic following the game.
Luka, unfortunately a defeat today. What are your thoughts on the performance?
I think today we didn't create enough. They were better side, 75 minutes. We tried last 15-20 minutes to do something, we tried to score. We had some chances, but I think from my point of view today we didn't have clear-cut chances. They played good, and in the end I think they deserve.
Defensively though, good performance. You must have been happy at half-time going in at 0-0.
Yeah, first half was okay. They had few chances from corner kick and free kick, I think. But you know, second half they score early, and then they have a lot of quality. They keep the ball very well. We find very hard to take possession, to play football. They were really good today, I think, and nothing. We turn out to the new game and try to take some points.
Yeah, we've just gone past the halfway mark of the season. What do you think the team needs to do? What do you think we need to improve on just to move up the table?
I think we all know we had a lot of chances during the season. We didn't convert them. Today I think 160 shots. We scored 17 goals. That's something I think what we have to improve. The good thing is we create a lot, but we don't score. And I think we have to keep our shape, our defensive work, as well offensive work. Just when we are in the final third, I think we have to be more clinical. We have to score more, and I hope that's going to change in future.
Roy, unlike Boxing Day, we waited 80 minutes for a shot today. Could the team perhaps been a bit more adventurous, do you think, in the attack?
Well, if we'd have wanted to get beat by 4 or 5 goals to 0, possibly, yeah.
The quality of the opposition was
They were very, very good. Our first half, I thought, was very disciplined and focused. I thought we certainly limited their goal-scoring chances. One offside goal, but apart from that, I thought we'd done quite well. But when they score the goal, then there's 2 opportunities or two possibilities. You know, you're not getting hold of the ball enough. They're keeping the ball too well. We're not able to get it from them. We're not having one of our better days technically. You can open yourself up for 40 minutes and see them exploit the spaces, or you can try to do what we did, i.e. keep it tight and keep the game under some sort of control until maybe 20 minutes from the end, and then take your chances, which is what we did, but it didn't work because we didn't score.
There were a couple of half chances towards the end there, but
Yeah, but I mean, the fact is this was a game where we weren't at our best by any stretch of imagination technically. We obviously just played better on the ball. They were very, very good on the ball, and they were also very good in terms of their organisation and structure. So it was going to be a tight game if we could keep it tight, and that's basically why we lost the game 1-0, and we didn't lose it by a lot of goals.
Hi, Roy. Steve Parish said before the game that you're pretty hopeful of getting Dom Solanke in from Liverpool on loan. Could you just tell us what he will bring and how important that could be?
Well, first of all, we've got to try and make certain we do get him here on loan. It's if Steve has mentioned that, then it's obviously not a secret that it's a target of ours and someone we would like to have. And what will he do for us? Well, he'll provide the attacking threat that a good centre forward should provide, and he's very much a proven goal scorer through all the age groups at Chelsea and with England. And if he comes here, it'll be a great opportunity to show that he can transfer that to Premier League football, because we have someone who is the profile we're looking for and someone who I think has the ability we're looking for, which once again today I thought we were sadly lacking.
Do you actually know him sort of better from your time with England, because he obviously hasn't played much senior football?
Yes, we know him better from the England days. We know him better from his performances with England, because at Liverpool, where at the time when he went there, I thought it was a very good signing from their point of view. He's been kept out of the team, but he's been kept out of the team by some very strong players. The three players they had up front for the best part of last season have started so well this season. It would take some player to knock them off their perch, and I don't think it's a particular criticism or a particular negative in relation to him that unfortunately he's not been able to do so.
Just to clarify on that, is it a loan deal you're looking at doing for Solanke, or something you'd like to bring him in?
No, I don't need to go into details. I don't want to go into details because I haven't been doing the deal. I think if you want real chapter and verse on the deal as it is or may be, you would have to speak to Doug Friedman or Steve Parish. Steve Parish, the chairman, has in an interview today given out the fact, I suppose, that I'm answering now, that there's an interest on our side, but I'm not prepared to go into any more detail than I've done with Matt here.
So there you have it. Now you've heard what Roy Hodgson and Luka Milivojevic had to say after the game. That concludes this week's podcast for the game against Chelsea. But make sure to come back next week for one post-match review of the game against Wolves. So thanks for listening, and remember to up the Palace.